Jai Radha Madhava Javirari Gopi Chanavallabha Girivardhari Jai Radha Madhava Javirari Gopi Chanavallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janarandana Jamna Tiravana Chari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya 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 So today we'll discuss some things related to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 7, text this I was confused because I was also thinking about the upcoming classes. Had my responsibilities mixed up here. Text 38. Purushasya cha samsthanam Purushasya cha samsthanam Swarupam va parasya cha Swarupam va parasya cha Jnanam cha Naigamam yat tad Jnanam cha Naigamam yat tad Guru Shishya Prayojanam Guru Shishya Prayojanam Purushasya cha samsthanam Swarupam va parasya cha Jnanam cha Naigamam yattad Guru Shishya Prayojanam Purushasya cha samsthanam Swarupam va parasya cha Jnanam cha Naigamam yattad Guru Shishya Prayojanam. Others, please.
Sorry, go ahead.
Purushasya cha samsthanam
Purushasya samsthanam
Sarupam va parasya cha
Sarupam va parasya cha
Jnanam cha naigamam yattad
Jnanam cha naigamam yattad
Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya prayojanam Purushasya cha samsthanam sasthanam Purushasya samsthanam Sarupam va parasya cha Sarupam va parasya cha Jnanam cha nagamam yattad Jnanam cha nagamam yattad Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya cha samsthanam
Purushasya samsthanam
Sarupam va parasya cha
Sarupam va parasya cha
Jnanam cha nagamam yattad
Jnanam cha naigamam yattad
Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya cha samsthanam
Purushasya cha samsthanam
Sarupam va parasya cha
Sarupam va parasya cha
Jnanam cha nagamam yattad
Jnanam cha naigamam yattad
Purushasya prayojanam
Purushasya prayojanam
Synonyms. Purushasya,
Purushasya
of the living entity.
of the living entity
Cha,
cha
also.
also
Samsthanam,
samsthanam
existence.
existence
Swarupam,
Sarupam
identity.
identity
Va,
va
either or. Parasya,
parasya
of the supreme.
of the supreme
Cha,
Cha
also.
also
Jnanam,
jnanam
knowledge.
knowledge
Cha,
cha
also.
also
Naigamam,
naigamam
in the matter of the Upanishads.
in the matter of the
Upanishads
Should remind us of the third verse of the Srimad Bhagawatam. This is the ripened fruit of the nigama, of the tree of Vedic knowledge, the Srimad Bhagavatam. Same word, nagama, it has the same root. Yet,
Yet,
that,
that,
tat,
tat,
the same,
the same,
Guru,
Guru,
spiritual master,
spiritual master,
Shishya,
Shishya,
disciple,
disciple,
Prayojanam,
Prayojanam,
necessity.
necessity.
Translation. What are the truths regarding the living entities and the Supreme Personality of Godhead? What are their identities? What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas? And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples? Responsively, please. What are the truths regarding the living entities
What are the truths regarding the living entities
and the Supreme Personality of Godhead?
and the Supreme Personality of Godhead?
What are their identities?
What are their identities?
What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas?
What are the specific values and knowledge of the Vedas?
And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples?
And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples?
Srila Prabhupada's purport. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm just a little self-conscious about that. The living entities are constitutionally servitors of the Lord who can accept all kinds of service from everyone. It is clearly declared that the Lord is the supreme enjoyer of the benefits of all sacrifices and penances, the proprietor of all that is manifested, and the friend of all living entities. That is his real identity. Therefore, when the living entity accepts this supreme proprietorship of the Lord and acts in that attitude, he resumes his real identity. In order to elevate the living entity to this standard of knowledge, there is the necessity of spiritual association. The bona fide spiritual master desires that his disciples know the process of rendering transcendental service to the Lord, and the disciples also know that they have to learn about the eternal relationship between God and the living entity from a self-realized soul. To disseminate transcendental knowledge, one must retire from mundane activities on the strength of enlightenment and knowledge in terms of Vedic wisdom. That is the sum and substance of all the questions in this verse. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim jakrapatamaham bandhu Shri Gurun Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sahitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupadamaham Dadati Swapadantikam Vansha Kalpa Turubhishta Kripasi Devacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Purushasya cha samsthanam swarupam vaparasya cha jnanam cha naigamam yattad guru shishya paryojanam. What are the truths regarding the living entities in the Supreme Personality of Godhead? What are their identities? What are the specific values in the knowledge in the Vedas? And what are the necessities for the spiritual master and his disciples? So Vidura is continuing these essential questions. And we've seen a whole catalog covering a really broad range. And then, he seems to be underscoring the essence of what it is he wants to do. So this isn't just a talk between a couple of friends. Vidura has submitted himself to Maitreya Muni as a shishya, just as Arjuna did with Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Shishyas stay on sadhana, I need to know what to do. So I'm asking you. I need to know what my life's about. Sanatana Goswami with Mahaprabhu. Who am I? And why do I seem to constantly suffer these threefold miseries? Who am I? What do we do? What are we about? Same question I had for Reverend McGee when I was 7 years old or whatever. Still don't know where that came from, but these are essential questions. Who am I? Why are we here? What are we about? And who's God? I mean, my other question was, what's God like? Some Methodist minister in Lompoc, California probably didn't have that answer, but I didn't know. The guy's like an authority on God, right? I'm 7, what do I know? So, and of course, his response kind of indicated that I was barking up the wrong tree here. So this is, this is our real business as human beings whose faith in the pursuit of virtue, progress, material progress, enjoyment, and even liberation, even freedom. Living it, as human beings who come to see through that, see how shabby a facade it is to a real life. So again, with the spiritual master stuff, and this just gives me an opportunity to finish up the basket of stuff that I wanted to share about this, about service, especially to the spiritual master. So Srila Prabhupada opens up his purport by referring, again, as we have over the last couple of days, to the last verse of chapter 5. Bhaktaram yatapasam sarvaloka maheshwaro surhridam sarvabhutanam yatmamam shantam richati. That people who have this vision, they can actually live a peaceful life. Srila Prabhupada called this verse the Bhagavad Gita's peace formula. So, what is that vision? Bhaktaram yatapasam. As we see it here, Krishna is the supreme enjoyer of the benefits of all sacrifices and penances. And Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, he's the proprietor of everything that is. It's all his. So what does that leave for us? Him. Suhridam Sarvabhutana. I'm yours. I'm all yours. And we'll see especially what would move Krishna to present himself especially as the eternal well-wisher, the property even of a particular living entity. So the big topic in this verse is the knowledge that we get from the spiritual master, and what do the guru and disciple need to know in order to conduct their lives. And really what it boils down to is 3 things. This is what the guru has to share and is eager to share with anybody who will come and take. And when someone approaches us with these kinds of questions, any of us, with these kinds of questions, we know how much we appreciate that, especially if somehow or other we're able to make a connection with them and they can appreciate what we have to say. So that's a big part of that's us. A big part of that's them. Just like when we give class, if something happened during class that was useful, that's at least 50% the audience's responsibility. Sometimes the audience will draw out of a speaker things that the speaker didn't even know he or she knew, or certainly, at least wasn't necessarily top of mind. But because we see that as helpful in helpful in unfolding, unpacking the kinds of knowledge, and I almost said information, because And I avoided it because that's not what we're after. We're after those transformative experiences. We're after those alchemical experiences. Just reading something, must have been last night in the online Nectar of Devotion Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu class. We were reading about anubhavas. Anubhavas are a kind of expression of spiritual ecstasy, but they also increase our spiritual ecstasy. An example is given that when you, there are two examples that were given by the acharyas, I think. But one is when you see someone who's very dear to you, especially if it's been a while. You're really happy, really overwhelmed with joy to see them, and you want to embrace them. And when you embrace them, your affection increases even more, and then you want to tighten the hug and prolong it, right? So these anubhavas are like that, and they're things like, well, some simple things like singing, dancing. Some of them are done with a lot of bodily activity and some not so much. One is dancing, and I was thinking recently of being impressed, thinking of one devotee in particular. We had a festival recently, and this devotee just became so caught up, so carried away in the kirtan that they just lost themselves in dancing. And I had a sense of, there'd been some tension over the last couple of days for that devotee, and I was just so happy to see them dancing, just completely lost in the kirtan. Just thought, this is what it's all about. This is our life. The other stuff, the things that we have to deal with for one reason or another. This is our real life. And singing. So there's a verse. I probably don't have my book in my Kindle on my iPad queued up to that particular section. But the verse giving an example of how singing can be an expression of transcendental ecstasy was the gopis were hearing Radharani singing Krishna's names, and their hearts melted. No, their hearts became like stone, and the stones melted. But in one of the commentaries, it's one of those verses around there, I can't remember if it was the one about singing or something else, it says that the heart becomes liquid by the influence of the transcendental sound. It becomes transformed. So it is sort of an alchemical experience, and that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for in these sessions. Whenever we get together for Hari Katha, whenever we get together for Kirtan, that's what it's really about. We want to see if we can crank things up to a measure where people's hearts start to melt, where our egos start to just kind of like crumble, break down, dissolve, and then transform into real egos. Because here, Vidura is asking, what is the real identity of the living entities? What is the real identity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead? So it all this stuff boils down to three categories of understanding. This is my coming back to not information, or not just information, but understanding. Prayojana, Sambandha Gyan, Abhideya Gyan, and Prayojana Gyan. Here we see Prayojana as necessity, but Prayojana is also the goal, or the fruit. That's the siddha, the perfection of our practice. I've talked yesterday about bhakti being divided into two main categories: sadhana bhakti and sadhya bhakti. Sadhya is another way of saying siddha, means you've attained the goal. So how do we develop that? That comes through development of Sambandha Gyan, Abhidheya Gyan, and Prayojan Gyan. Sambandha Gyan is what we see here in the first part of this verse. Who are the living entities? Who is the Supreme Personality of God? What's the nature of their relationship? Abhidheya Gyan is how do we realize that relationship? How do we activate it? How do we bring it to life? How do we live there? And Prayojan is, what's it like when we get there? And it's, we see in the Bhagavatam, especially in the 10th canto, it's all love. All you need is love. Do I hear the trumpets? There we go. Da 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 da. So that's what this is really about. So how do we bring this about? So that takes me back first to the 11th canto. So yesterday we looked at third chapter, text 22. Unfortunately, I didn't have it together this morning again to look and see which of the sages is speaking. But one of the Navayogendras is addressing King Nimi. So yesterday we heard Tasmad Gurum Prapadyeta Jigyasushaya Uttama Shabde Parecha Nishnatam Brahmanyupasham Ashram. So that someone who sees through the scam of the material world, that person needs a spiritual master. Not everybody needs a spiritual master. I mean, if we approach people and we want to talk to them about Krishna, we get a sense of how much they actually are ready for a spiritual master. The need's there, but it's not realized. They're just not ready to hear. So, by our character, we hope, even if the contact appears not to be an initial success, if somehow or other we approach them in the right mood, with a little humility and a little real concern. Just as I mentioned recently, a talk given here maybe in the early 80s by my godbrother Pragosh, who was quite a prolific book distributor. Anybody who knows Pragosh, especially when he's young, he was this just gorgeous, smiling, smart young guy. And he would walk up to people. And just talk to them. Smile, talk to them, tell them a little bit about what the book's about, ask them where they're from, ask them to find out a little bit about what they're about, and then make a connection with them. And they'd walk away with, one or more books, generally happy. I remember him telling me a story once when he was here, must have been 74, he was at the airport, Honolulu airport, distributing Srila Prabhupada's books, and he sat down next to a man and started talking to him, showing him the books and everything. And the guy looked at him and he said, "You're a salesman." And Pragosh said, "Oh, no, I'm not." And he said, "Oh, no, you're a salesman." He says, "I sell airliners." I know a salesman. He sells multi-million-dollar airplanes to airlines. So I know a salesman when I see him. So once when he was visiting here later, Pragosha was asked by a friend of ours who kind of had a business mind, a marketing mind. So he asked Pragosh in the most wonderful way, "Could you share with us your typical exchange with the typical airport remark?" And Pragosh just looked at him like, "Huh?" As if he were speaking Greek or something. And so he repeated the question, "Can you share with us the typical exchange you might have with the typical airport mark?" And Pragosha said, "Well, here's the thing. If you see them as marks, you'll never make a connection. If you see them as a family member who's been lost for a long time, or a long-lost godbrother, then you might be able to make a connection. But you've got to actually you've got to actually be able to make a personal connection with them. If you want to see them just as a mark, somebody who you're going to score on, that's not going to work. So, the real business is of the devotees who preach in any form is to, as I've said before, grow Shraddha, grow faith where we find it and plant it where we don't. And we can do that best by our character. So the next verse, this verse was about, the need for the spiritual master and also the qualification of the spiritual master. Essentially, the spiritual master has to be immersed in bhakti, has to be immersed in devotional life. And then the next verse is just as interesting. He says, Tatra Bhagavatam Dharman Shikshe Gurvatma Daivata Amaya Ya Nivritya Yais Tushyeratmat Madohari. He says, accepting the bona fide spiritual master as one's life and soul and worshipful deity, the disciple should learn from him the process of devotional service. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, the soul of all souls, is inclined to give himself to his pure devotees. Therefore, the disciple should learn from the spiritual master to serve the Lord without duplicity and in such a faithful and favorable way that the Lord, being satisfied, will offer himself to such a faithful disciple. So that's a big key. Being able to, this is the Guru's business, first of all. The Guru has to be able to offer this, how did he put it? Offer this service to the Lord without duplicity, and then share that with the disciple, what the Gurus are doing, sharing. They're sharing their faith. They're sharing their bhakti with others. And when devotees appreciate that, it means so much to them. I find it interesting that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has a very terse, almost cryptic commentary on this verse. He says, the Lord is satisfied. The Lord gives himself in the form of the deity that one may see, touch, and know him. So this is one way that the Lord offers himself to the disciple. I know of sometimes gurus will give their disciples a deity or maybe a Govardhan Shila or something like that. I know that's a practice in some circles. So this is the relationship between the teacher and the student, is one of mutual service. The Guru serves the disciple. One of my friends sometimes says, we're not looking for disciples. We are not looking for disciples. We're looking for gurus. We're looking for people who can teach Krishna consciousness, who can get Krishna consciousness, who are able to embrace what we've gotten from our acharyas and are eager to share with others. And when that happens, it's an amazing thing. So I wanted to share a little. I don't remember if I've read any of this before. This is an article I wrote a few years ago about service to the spiritual master, what an essential ingredient it is. Srila Prabhupada, there's a verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita that Srila Prabhupada translates as saying that intimate service to the spiritual master is the active ingredient in spiritual life. And I wrote this article comparing it to, using my own background, I guess, comparing it to the catalyst you use when you glass surfboards or when you fix dings, repair dings, or what are dings? Holes that get made in your surfboard by rocks or reef or other surfboards or whatever. So you have to use fiberglass, and then you put this resin over it. But the resin needs a catalyst to make it harden. Otherwise, it's this impossibly sticky stuff that just will drive you insane forever. So if you add just the right amount of catalyst, then the resin will harden and make a very hard shell for your surfboard. Make it useful for riding 40-foot Jaws monsters or whatever it is your taste is. So, just want to share a little bit of this article that I wrote, because this is something that I was thinking about a lot. So I say, Srila Jiva Goswami cites Srimad Bhagawatam, where Sri Krishna himself says, I, the soul of all beings, cannot be satisfied as much by ritual worship, by generating progeny, by observing penances, by self-control, as I am by faithful service rendered to one's spiritual master. It seems then that service to the spiritual master is what accounts for any success in our attempts at making spiritual progress. With these truths in mind, devotees in the temples founded by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada and his followers around the world begin each day with a meditation on the Guru by singing Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's Guruvashtakam. And in the eighth of these prayers, Chakravarti Thakur says, Yasya prasadad bhagavat prasado, yasya prasadam nakati kuto. By the spiritual master's mercy, one may receive Krishna's blessings. Without the Guru's grace, no one can make any spiritual progress. So, from the beginning of Gaudiya Vaishnavism spread in the West, Srila Prabhupada established the central position of the Guru in the lives of the sadhakas. But as in surfboard repair, where we attain optimal results by adding just the right catalyst in just the right manner, we attain optimal results in cultivating Krishna Bhakti by developing a particular kind of service to the Guru. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu tells us that practical spiritual life is built on the foundation of taking shelter of the spiritual master, which includes several components. There, we read that yesterday. There, Srila Rupa Goswami explains those first components of sadhana. Guru pada ashrayas tasmat Krishna dikshadi shikshanam vishrambena guru seva. A sadhaka takes shelter of a guru, accepts initiation, takes instruction from, and serves the Guru with faith and trust. Sometimes we see the word Vishramba translated as respect or reverence. We see that in Srila Prabhupada's Prabhupada, I think, often refers to as awe and reverence. Bhanu Swami and Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as we saw yesterday, says reverence. But it has other meanings as well. And a relationship with the Guru rooted in reverence is undoubtedly helpful, especially in earlier stages of practice. There should be that reverence. There should be, as I mentioned the other day, some boundary. The Guru and the disciple, particular Guru and disciple, decide just what that boundary looks like. But there are some boundaries. That doesn't mean there isn't intimacy at the same time. But a quick exploration of that word, Vishrambha, reveals that the character of the relationship with the spiritual master should come to be quite different from the kind of distance implied in words such as respect and reverence. Srila Rupa Goswami himself defines Vishrambha in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in the context of discussing the mood of friendship. He says there that Vishrambha is a deep, familiar trust between two friends as equals. Free, and these are Rupa Goswami's words, free from any sort of restriction or control. In his commentary on this verse, Srila Jiva Goswami further explains that this deep trust implies not only freedom from excessive reverence and fear, but also a sense that the friends are in no way different from each other. Elsewhere, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti says, it's a sense that one's own life, body, mind, intelligence, clothes, and everything else are one with those of the object of love. All I have is yours. Not just me. All I have is yours. Even my clothes. But one with a deep, so he says, so I write, Vishrambena Guru Seva then points to service based on a deep sense of identity with the Guru, to the extent that the disciple has no doubt whatsoever that the Guru has only his or her interests at heart. The disciple then has complete freedom to reciprocate acting with no interest other than the Guru's. In this way, such mature affection for the Guru, which should never be mistaken for mundane sentiment, manifests as an intense focus on the Guru's heart. That focus in turn forges a sense of mamata, which Srila Jiva Goswami defines as a complete identity with the beloved, such that the identity and feelings of one and their beloved are not separate. This mood appropriately describes the feeling the Brajavasis have for Krishna. As Srila Prabhupada often defined Krishna consciousness as the realization that I am Krishna's and he is mine, we may also identify mature Guru Bhakti as the sense that I am the Guru's and he is mine. Or, more to the point, his desire or her desire is mine. There's more, but it's late, I don't. There's a few paragraphs more. But the main point that I wanted to make was that the real relationship between the disciple and the Guru should ultimately be one of identifying with the Guru's heart. So there's always a sense of reciprocal service. The Guru never sees themselves as separate from the students. Just as I mentioned, did I mention it in class yesterday that I did, about Malati? That must have been in a different context. There was an incident where, this is how deeply it can run. You might remember that Malati, even though she just had a baby, she and her husband, Shyam Sundar, went with 2 other couples to England, knowing no one, trying to, with an idea of introducing Krishna consciousness outside America. Really ambitious. These happened to be very cool folks, and a little bold, so they were actually able to meet all kinds of people. And was the headline you would like to share? Krishna chant shocks London, something like that. So later, Srila Prabhupada was staying in Mayapur, in his Bhajan Kutir there, and you can see the updated version of the Bhajan Kutir nowadays. Back then, it was much simpler. And he was spending time with one of his godbrothers who had an ashram nearby. And Malati came in with their lunch prasad. Malati was she was in her 20s then. She was an attractive young woman. And Srila Prabhupada picked up on what this sannyasi godbrother of his must have been thinking. Oh, we're being served by this pretty young American woman. This is a little weird for a couple of old sannyasis. So Prabhupada picked up on what he was probably feeling, and he said, yes, you see that girl there? Yes, she cooks for me. Yes, she takes care of me. But I will tell you this, she would cut her throat for me, and I would cut mine for her. So this is how deeply the relationship between the Guru and the disciple can run. There can be that, such a deep sense of identity. And can be a little bewildering sometimes. But that's how it is. We have innumerable stories of devotees who had difficulty. Devotees who gave up sannyas, and when they came to render service, Srila Prabhupada didn't blink an eye. 4 sannyasis, 4 of our brothers who had just taken sannyas and all of a sudden started preaching that Prabhupada was Krishna. And Prabhupada excused them from the society of devotees, told them, just go away. Don't go near any temples, just go preach. And they did. And when they came back to Srila Prabhupada, after that, and it was just a couple of months, each of them approached Srila Prabhupada and apologized, asked for forgiveness. Srila Prabhupada, as far as I know, never mentioned it again. Never mentioned it. It never came. And the same thing with a number of his disciples who had taken sannyas young, which is quite a risky thing, and had to step aside from that ashram. We like to say fall down because it makes us feel good, I guess. But his godbrother, Srila Sridhar Maharaj, said he didn't see it that way. He said that this is such an insane step. This is such a crazy thing to do. That if you're not able to maintain it, what's the loss? You've tried something. He says, what you've gained by making the attempt is more than you could imagine. Even if it appears to fail. It's like, going out, as Shamsundar has characterized it, chasing rhinos. Who can catch a rhinoceros? If you don't catch a rhinoceros, what's the big deal? Who could do that anyway? So, it's a kind of a crazy thing. So, Srila Prabhupada, he never batted an eye. They stepped aside from sannyas, and then they came into the society. There's one devotee, the word was sent around immediately. The so-and-so has fallen down, he's given up his sannyas, given up his GBC service. Don't let him near your temple. Srila Prabhupada was furious. I heard his lip was quivering when he called this one devotee who was behind spreading the word, and his lip was quivering when he told him, you made it impossible for him to come back. You've humiliated him so much, you've made it impossible for him to come back. This is how deep that runs. And I mentioned poor Sundar yesterday, when he came to Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada thundered, I wanted you to do this. I don't care about this thing. I wanted you to do it. Srila Prabhupada has such love for his devotees, especially for Sundar and Govinda Dasi. They took care of him after he had the stroke, heart attack, or whatever it was in 1967. They personally nursed him back to health. So the Guru always remembers these little things that the devotees do, any little thing. And that sense of identity between the Guru and the Shishya, so deep that you can't imagine. He sometimes says, you've heard him sometimes say that, if you can't follow the instruction of the spiritual master, I reject you. But we also read recently that when somebody asked him about that, did you really reject so-and-so? He says, no, never reject anybody. The bond is there. We can try to break the bond by going back on our promise to the Guru. Or the Guru may fail in delivering to the disciple. But to make that attempt on the part of either party is very much impresses Krishna and purchases him. And so it's this, because the Guru, we talked about the seventh, today we talked about the 8th verse of Guru Vastakam, yesterday I mentioned the 7th. Sakshadvari tvena samasta shastraya uttastata bhaviti eva shavi. That the disciple should identify the Guru to, at least in some senses, with the Lord. But he should also understand, kintu prabhorya priya eva tasya. However, he's also very dear to Krishna. He's Krishna's. And that's even better. That's even more important in some senses. So if we can endear ourselves to someone who's dear to Krishna, then Krishna might become purchased. Anyway, I'm going to stop. Any questions or comments? Thank you so much. Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.